Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Simran, and I'm with Canopy. Canopy is a co-working space based in San Francisco. And those are our members. Thank you for joining. And those are not, I'll put our link in the chat box below so you can check us out and maybe join if you want to, if you're in the Bay Area. So this evening's talk is with Lara Park Menning, and it's going to be part of this is a three-part series. So we'll be doing it today, in 2 weeks' time, and another 2 weeks. So you'll see all of our newsletter. And the conversation is about emotionally fluent leadership, which is very much needed right now to help us get through this tough time that we're all experiencing. So I'll let you take it from here, Lara.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Simran. It's a delight to be here. I know we had planned to be in person, but everything's different these days. So I'm glad to be here with you virtually. So I just want to get to a point where I'm sharing my screen here. Here we go. All right. Great. So as Simran said, my name is Lara Park Menning. For those of you who already know me, hello, and I'm pleased to meet you if I haven't met you yet. I'm founder of LARASAH, and our mission is to empower entrepreneurs and professionals to experience success in their lives and in their careers without burnout. And prior to starting LARASAH, I co-founded a pharmaceutical development services company right here in San Francisco Bay Area called Nucleo Life Sciences. So I know firsthand that being an entrepreneur is an incredibly rewarding experience. It's exciting being your own boss and defining a vision and bringing it to fruition. But it's also a profession that is high stress. And also, if you're a professional, prior to founding LARASAH, I had a professional career in corporate pharmaceutical development. And so I understand I empathize with the challenges of balancing work and life as you grow your career within a company that you're passionate about as well. So I just want to get to know you a little bit. I'd like to try and get us to do a little poll. Simran, if you don't mind helping me with just issuing that, because it looks like I can't send that now with sharing my screen.
Oh, do you want me to send it out?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So very simple. I just wanted to know your background. Are you an entrepreneur, a professional, or something else?
It looks like we've had, 4 people have answered.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. All right. Lara, can you see the poll also?
I can, thank you. So we're almost done, but that's great. So it looks like, there's a balance between entrepreneurs and other. So that's an interesting dynamic. And we've got a professional as well. Great. So thank you for doing that.
Would you like me to end it now?
Yes, please.
All right.
Thank you. All right. So, no matter what your profession is or where you are in your career, we all experience stress. Forbes conducted a study that concluded that 100% of entrepreneurs experience burnout. 100%. But stress is also the root cause of 75 to 90% of doctors' visits. It's a factor in 5 out of the 6 leading causes of death, including heart disease, cancer, stroke, respiratory disease, and accidents. And of course, this is pre-COVID-19, but just to give you an indication, stress has a big implication in our lives. And I know that people will say that you have to manage your burnout in order to have a more fulfilling life and career. But did you know that failing to manage your stress is the biggest threat to your company's bottom line? So stress doesn't just affect your performance at work. It can also cause you to not communicate as effectively with investors, which can jeopardize the financing of your company. It can lead you to hire an underperforming team or lose top performers that add the most value to your company. It can lead you to attract difficult clients that rob you of your personal life. It can drain your energy that then drains your bank account. And it can cause you to agonize over decisions and miss out on opportunities that took too long to jump into. But in this presentation, I'm excited to share with you and introduce the 5 key areas that we need to strengthen for sustainable success. We're honing in today on the concept of emotional fluency. So you will leave today's workshop with a useful, practical tool to enhance your emotional fluency. And you'll discover your emotional blind spots that can lead to poor decision-making and a decreased influence. And it can also help you, support you become a stronger leader. And at LARASAH, we're also passionate about supporting our clients in, and just supporting our community in having stronger leadership in their homes, in their careers, and in their communities. So what are these 5 key areas? Well, first off, we have body vitality, which includes movement and nutrition. Next is a calm mind, which includes sleep and meditation. Then there's aligned purpose, which is about productivity, but a more joyful productivity. There's stress support, which is tailored to a more personalized practice. So you will actually use these tools that can decrease your stress. And finally, balanced emotions, which is today's topic of emotional fluency. The focus of our talk is emotionally fluent leadership. So I may be bilingual in English and French and have different levels of fluency in 3 other languages, but I have to admit that I wasn't always emotionally fluent. In fact, you know, I've always been a very focused and driven woman. My parents weren't wealthy, so I worked hard through school and got myself through school through working part-time and paid my way. I fueled each level of growth through determination and seeking the joy in whatever struggles were thrown my way, and also just reframing my struggle. And after a professional career, as I mentioned previously, in 2014, I co-founded a company with my spouse, Nucleo Life Sciences, which allowed us to have an incredible impact on our clients. So we're developing pharmaceutical drugs that were addressing challenging problems our clients were having. These are small virtuals or big pharmaceutical companies. And so a meaningful impact. We also had a great lifestyle. We were able to travel and work together. And this was back when working remotely was maybe a little bit more a luxury. Now it's more common, but so great things. However, we were a profitable company. Actually, from the first month, we were in the black and have been profitable ever since. So in fact, we've been able to enjoy 90% of referrals and lots of repeat business. So really proud of that achievement. But as we grew, that's where the struggles started to come in. And that's where I encountered my challenges with emotional fluency. Because although we were able to have high sales because of my partner's high technical expertise and my empathy for my clients' challenges and delivering solutions that met their needs, when it came to growing a team, I was less empathetic with my staff's struggles. So when they presented challenges to me, I would be happy to help them reframe and find solutions, and I was even open to hearing their emotions. But that was the calm enthusiasm and joy was the extent of my emotional fluency at work. Because as a leader, I didn't feel like I could share my emotions at work. Everything could be reframed positively. And this may sound fantastic, but the thing is that people want to work with humans. And when you have a limited emotional fluency, it doesn't make you very human. And I think for me, realizing that you can express a whole host of emotions, even as a leader, even in your companies, but it's how you express them that matters. So I'm not talking about yelling in a meeting or bawling in your boss's office. It's I had to learn kind of how to express these things and be more vulnerable. So I actually believed, and maybe some of you can empathize with this, that I was never angry. I almost never cried. And I saw this as a strength, which, I was resilient, but it allowed me to be perhaps a great boss in wartime, but not necessarily in times of peace. And so high performers felt like they were almost living up to this unbelievable expectation in terms of behavior. So learning to feel the emotions and express them in a way that was healthier allowed me to communicate and empathize more effectively with my staff and hire the team, because prior to that, I went through rounds, maybe other entrepreneurs can empathize with this, rounds of not hiring the best team or losing high performers that were adding value. And so I was then able to hire that team that allowed me to take a more strategic position in the company, and even found this company, LARASAH, that I'm also very passionate about. So one of the great side effects of learning emotional fluency is it allowed me to make decisions that were more aligned with my best interests and also my vision for my life, as well as those who were closest to me as well. And quite frankly, I am happier, healthier, and wealthier as a result. So perhaps some of you have experienced emotional taboos. You don't know this about me, especially since my accent is kind of neutral, but I was born in England, and I grew up believing that you needed to have a stiff upper lip and keep calm and carry on. And this was due to my British upbringing, even though I grew up in Canada. And so along with learning, these norms, we don't even realize they're subconscious, that we absorb these emotional rules and norms. And ironically, of course, this emotional environment is very similar to corporate North America, where you don't express anger, you don't express sadness, and everything seems fine even when it's not. In fact, if I had never worked outside of North America, I might have thought that this was the way things are around the world. But my first job was in France, and I can tell you that yelling in a meeting room and bawling in the hallway was something that I had observed fascinating difference when I moved back to North America. So if you don't mind, if you could raise your hand if you have ever experienced any kind of emotional taboos, and this can be on a societal level and on a family level, with respect to anger or sadness or even joy, any kind of emotions. And Simran, I can't seem to see any of the interaction.
I'm going to send a little instruction on how to raise a hand in Zoom.
Perfect.
Yeah, hold on 1 second.
That's a good point.
And I'm just going to add it to the chat box. And hold on 1 second.
And the chat box is in the far right.
There you go. So basically, on the icon labeled participants at the bottom center of your screen, click on that and then hit the button raise hand, and then your hand is now raised, and I'll be able to call on you and unmute you so you can, if you have a question, or just show of hands as to like for Lara's question.
And I'd love to be able to see all of you, but this is instead of quick raise hand. Thank you.
I see, so Marie has put her hand up.
Perfect. So perhaps just one of you has experienced this, and that's great. And if not, thanks for participating. So, so culturally, whether we realize it or not, we all come with different stigma around different emotions. And the key is to be connected with the full range of emotions and to learn how to express these emotions more effectively. And I didn't land on emotional fluency right away, which is why I'm so happy to be sharing this with you, because it's a very powerful tool. And we all come to the table with different levels of fluency. So, thank you, Dan, as well. Great. So, emotions. I thought this would be interesting to share with all of you. This is from a study done by 4 Finnish researchers, but it was a global study. And they asked participants, subjects to, they triggered certain emotions through images, sounds, video clips, or words. And then they asked the subjects to illustrate where they were feeling this emotion in their body. And it was kind of interesting how universally they saw similar results. So you can see here this different colors. So the -15 is an absence of feeling in the body, going up to +15, which is a high sensation in the body. And if we just take a look at this first one, anger, it's fascinating to see, look at this person. You almost feel like their fists are lighting up into that fight response when you look at this anger. And then to contrast that with perhaps depression, which is very different from sadness here too, and you can see this absence of sensation in the body. So if you're interested in knowing more about this study, please feel free to email me. My email will be on the last slide, and I'm happy to share the article. So emotions are felt in the body. And I just want to also highlight that there are actually no negative emotions. There's just healthy and less healthy ways to express your emotions. We talked about there's on 2 ends of the spectrum, you have very active, which can be, yelling or bawling, and this is those are fine, but not necessarily, doing that in more of a public forum. There's a way to do that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's the passive way of expressing emotions. So today we're going to be sharing a framework on how to express your emotions in a more emotionally fluent manner. And we can actually increase our influence when we practice detecting and listening to our emotions. when they sound like a whisper instead of a scream. So we can learn to express our emotions more effectively and clearly. And if this feels kind of out of reach, don't worry. As I promised, there's a simple framework that I'll be sharing with you. But first, I'd like to do a little assessment. And if you don't have a piece of paper or pen, if you want to just take your smartphone and your notes and just write this down, but there are 4 questions I'd like you to take a moment to answer. So it's just a self-assessment for yourself. You don't have to share this, but I'd like you to score yourself 1 to 10 on these 4 questions. So 1, how well are you connected to your own emotions? And if you could rate yourself from 1 to 10. And then how well are you connected to the emotions of others? And then you can rate yourself to 1 to 10. And then how well do you communicate your feelings? And how high is your influence? These things are related. 1 to 10. And finally, how well do you receive others' feelings, needs, and desires? Okay. So I'll give you a second to score yourself from 1 to 10 on each of these 4 questions. So when you finished, I want you to look at your lowest and your highest score. And this can be really interesting information in terms of understanding where our strengths and opportunities for growth are in the area of emotional fluency. And I want you to think back to any challenges, interpersonal challenges you may have experienced recently. I know that the social distancing is triggering a lot of opportunity for working on emotional fluency with those that are closest with us and even managing relationships from a distance. So do you see any connection between that challenge you had and your lowest score? So maybe the two are tied together. So for me, when I started my journey with emotional fluency about 7 years ago, I remember that I was more connected, even back then I was more connected with others' emotions, so in question number 2, than with my own. So you can see that you can score high on one area and lower in another. But the great thing is emotional fluency is just like learning a language. You can learn and practice. It is not something that is stagnant or that will stay the same for the rest of your life. You just have to practice. All right, so let's get into the framework now. So let's think of a time that you felt frustrated. Maybe it wasn't that long ago. And so what are the steps? This is just a simple 4-step process. The first step, and this works for any emotion, but the first step is to remove yourself from the situation. So if you're in the middle of a conversation and you can sense that tension's rising, you can always ask to pause and table the conversation to later. If you're in the middle of a meeting, you can also, take that time after that meeting and make sure that you take the time to process, which we'll talk about in just a moment. You can always put a pause on a conversation. it just takes some practice, and there's lots of tips on how to do that. Next, you want to feel the emotion. We talked about how emotions are felt in the body. So the best way to feel the emotion is to move through it. There are methods like stomping through it, go for a walk, you know, you can put yourself in the car, yell in the car, lots of different ways to process it. But you want to move through that emotion. You want to feel it and move through it. Then, once you felt that, you want to ask yourself, what did you need from the other person or group? Because fundamentally, for instance, in the case of frustration, it's your body's way of saying either a boundary was infringed, somebody was violating a boundary, or you felt like a boundary might be violated, or you know, there's some need that you're not getting met. Your emotion's fully valid. You just need to understand what fundamentally is that need that you need to get addressed. And then once you've processed all of that, then it's time to return to the situation and have a conversation with either that individual or group. So you can plan for that meeting or conversation, depending on the context. And the first thing is you want to say, I feel. So the first, something that's really important in this step 4 is you want to keep it all in the first person for the first 3 parts. I feel, and whatever that emotion is. When I see, hear, or observe, so it's again not a when you do this, but when I observe, you want to try and keep it neutral. Because I need or value, and it's going back to the need that you had established. And then once you've stated those 3 things, that is all in the first person, then you can ask, would you be willing to do X, Y, and Z to help meet that need? And sometimes we meet the need individually. You know, we've gone through steps 1 through 3 and we realize, well, you know, how can I meet this need myself? But there's also cases where you need somebody else to help you meet that need. And so that's where you make the request, and which essentially starts a conversation, of course. But at least you've got a calm way to express what your feelings and how you'd like to get them addressed. So I would normally ask if you have questions on that framework. We're going to go through a case study, and then we can address questions just because of the virtual nature of this call. But I'd like to just share how you can do this, and just giving you an example right now. So, for instance, I just last month I received an email for an on-time delivery report that I needed. And this was just because I'm still doing both companies right now. And I wasn't getting the quality of the report that I needed. It was also late. And so it was an email, so it's pretty easy for me to take a break to do step 1 and remove myself from the situation. 2, I went for a walk and kind of stamped it out. And then 3, you know, I looked at, you know, am I being unreasonable? What is this? And I realized, no, I need this report to be done with the quality that I'm asking for and on time, because it's freeing up my time to work on other things like my new business and things like that. And so I then set up a meeting with this individual, and we talked through the situation, and I explained my frustration, but I was able to say it calmly. And I also explained what I was seeing was the report wasn't being delivered in either on time or with the level of attention to detail that I needed. Because, and this was important to me because this report was helping me ensure that across the portfolio, that our client satisfaction was being met. And so it was a valuable report to me, and I needed to check on this on a monthly basis. And so I asked them would they be willing to spend some more time and ensure that this was happening in a way that it was meeting my deadline. And as I said, this opens a conversation, and that allowed us to have a conversation about priorities and resourcing, but it also increased, ironically, her motivation, because she hadn't been putting in the time on this report. She didn't realize how valuable it was to me. So we were able to reprioritize things, but also increase motivation. And this month I did receive my report on time. So that's just one example of how you can use this framework. And I hope everyone's doing all right so far, but I wanted to give you another case study. I don't know, Simran, do you think maybe we could pause and see if there's any questions on the framework at this point before I go into the case study?
Yeah, for sure. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I see Daniel, your hand is up. Do you have a question?
Oops.
No. Or was it from earlier?
It's all right.
No problem.
Does anyone else have any questions?
That's great. Okay.
Okay. All right. So we'll carry on, Lara.
Thank you. All right. So the next thing I wanted to share with you is a case study which I felt could relate to everyone. And that is the case of the difficult client. So whether or not we're an entrepreneur or professional, we deal with clients that are either internal, like our colleagues or our bosses or our sponsors, or if we're an entrepreneur, perhaps an investor or a customer. But we all can deal with clients, and sometimes you can deal with clients that kind of look like this. Sometimes you can't see them on the other end of the phone, but this is what it feels like they look like. So this particular case study was with a high challenge client. They had a difficult timeline and like a very shortened timeline. They had a confrontational corporate culture, which we learned over time. And they also sort of like a blame culture. And they also had a high challenge project from a technical perspective. And when I came into this conflict, I wasn't dealing directly with the client. I had a senior project manager who was in charge of the client relationship, but the client had reached out to me via email and voicemail to express that they were unhappy with the level of customer service they were receiving, and they were unhappy with the current timelines. So the first thing I did was to, of course, go to the senior project manager to get a lay of the land, and this is what was explained to me. First, we were making clinical supplies, so for clinical trials, and yes, their compound was high challenge, but technically we weren't experiencing great challenges with a compound, so that was good. The second thing was that the challenge was coming from a lack of decision making. So yes, there was a delay in the project because decisions weren't being made in a timely manner. So with a tight timeline, certain key decisions had to be made quickly in order to ensure that any supplies that needed to be ordered or any pivotal technical decisions that drove the rest of the project were made to keep the timeline on track. And that wasn't happening. And even though the timeline was getting delayed, they wanted to maintain, even though the decisions were getting delayed, they wanted to maintain the overall timeline. So I heard her perspective, and then I also acknowledged my disappointment that this client was dissatisfied, and we set up a call. So the first situation of removing yourself from the situation, that was taken care of. We also prepped for the meeting to understand what our needs and what our challenges were coming into the meeting. So when we stepped into the conversation, we had 3 key decision makers on the client side. Yes, there were a lot of decision makers, and that makes things a little bit more complicated. And then we had myself and the senior project manager. So to avoid triangulation, make sure that everyone who needed to be in the room was in the room. And I must say that early on, I explained that we understood that they were frustrated with the current situation. And naming underlying emotions is so powerful to deflate conflict. They were able to then say, well, it's not frustrated, impatient, maybe disappointed, but you still were able to take it down from a level 7 of intensity to maybe a level 4 or 5. And we listened to their perspective about, the timeline not being met. But we also were able to explain how we were disappointed, how we value our relationship as a partnership. We see a client relationship as being win-win, with the service provider, and how important it was for us to have our customers satisfied, if not more. And but we also were able to explain, they explained that this timeline they had promised to their leadership, and so they were frustrated with the concept of having to say that it was delayed. And we also explained that our needs for timely decisions. And we also empathize with the fact that, it is challenging when you have when you promise to your leadership a certain timeline and they aren't able, you aren't able to deliver. That is a challenging message to deliver, but how can we help you overall? So it turned out that once we had, named these emotions and talked about our different needs, and they had requested that we try and maintain the timeline, and we explained, we didn't want to burn out our team, but how could we do things in a better way, and how could we try and catch up in some areas? And it's interesting that once we had gotten through those layers, we were able to find out that they were actually having a hard time understanding the data. And so they didn't have the courage, or they didn't feel like they had the space to be able to say that they needed more time to understand the data in our technical meetings. So that's why they weren't able to make decisions quickly. They were delaying because they didn't understand, and they weren't saying this to us, but they didn't feel comfortable saying this to us. So we came to agreement that moving forward, we would slow down the technical conversations, that we would allow the space for them to ask questions, and that, we could look at the overarching timeline to see where there were opportunities, but not just on our end, but with other service providers that were involved in the overarching timeline. So this turned out to be a very fruitful conversation. The senior project manager was able to take the lead again and change the format of the meetings to slow them down and pause and ask more questions. And it turned into not only a satisfied customer, but we had repeat business from them. And we established a strong relationship, which was great. So that's just an example of how you can use this framework to address more challenging clients. So any questions there again? How feasible does it feel to use this framework, and do you feel any kind of resistance?
And again, you can raise your hand or type it in the chat box.
Perfect.
I guess we don't have any questions right now.
Okay.
Oh wait, I see two. Okay, so Marie's gonna go first.
Great.
So go ahead, Marie.
Hi, Lara. I am a bit hesitant when dealing with clients who are clearly emotionally involved and just stuck in their angry state. Do you recommend like asking them to reschedule time for later, or like a good phrase to say to kind of get them to take a moment to just kind of regroup?
So to help me understand, are you on a call or are you in a meeting?
A call.
You're on a call and you're one-on-one?
Yes.
Okay. And they're verbalizing their frustration?
Yeah. Just kind of keep harping on their side and that they're upset about a certain deliverable.
And have you tried to say, I feel like this might be difficult, or that you might be frustrated? Have you ever tried mirroring that?
A little bit, like showing the empathy for them, like, I can understand how you were expecting a different result, so this could be frustrating. But then trying to show our company's side as well, of like, we had set up these expectations, which we feel that we met.
Right.
So to kind of just to get them to see the other side. Right.
And fundamentally, they're frustrated because they've got some need that's not being met. So
yes, and like they need to, of course, report up to their leaders. So
yeah. So yes, you can kind of table, like, I really feel like you're frustrated. Maybe we can talk about, maybe we can table this to another meeting or a call where we can brainstorm how we can address this need that you have. Mm-hmm. So that it feels more collaborative, that it's not just, because I think that's one of the things that I mentioned is we can get our needs met in different ways. Sometimes it's ourselves or our internal team, and sometimes it's another person. But when we focus on what that need is, we can come to a more fruitful solution. Sometimes it's in layers too. So I understand, yeah, it can be very valuable to say, okay, I hear this, let's try and brainstorm, so they come to the next meeting with a more creative mindset, and you can just sort of start the conversation saying, we understand this frustration about X, Y, and Z, so you don't have to rehash the whole thing.
That's nice. Yeah, put a different frame on it for the next time.
Creative mindset as opposed to blame. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear how that works for you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And we have another question from Daniel.
Hello.
Hello, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Sorry, the reason my hand was raised is because this is actually my first Zoom meeting, and I didn't realize that when you raise a hand, you got to put it back down. So, learning curve here, but I'm wondering, the first scenario that you were talking about, is that with not just a client? Could that potentially be also with an employee, for example?
Yes. That was a staff member, yeah.
Okay, and in that situation, when you do establish what sort of issue it is that you guys have, is that a point where when you do have that talk that you sort of establish like a guideline of what is expected, and are there, I guess what I'm wondering is like how much of like an allowance or of time or kind of a leash, like if you feel like you're constantly repeating yourself about the same thing, like how many opportunities do you give somebody to understand what you're saying until you realize either perhaps they're not listening, or maybe they just feel strongly opposed to what you're saying, and therefore they just are deciding that that's not something.
Right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's a few different things.
Kind of a long, complicated question, but
no, it's great. It's
I'm
great.
just curious.
Yeah, no, great question.
It's hard to know when to draw a line when you feel as though you're either not really being understood correctly, or whether you're being heard, but there's just this sort of disagreement without acknowledging that there's a disagreement.
Yeah. So one, you talked about aligning expectations, if I hear you correctly. Two, you talked about kind of a repeated performance issue, if we will.
Yeah.
And the third is, how many times do you give them allowance to have this performance issue? So the first step is absolute. Okay, so you would say that's what your question is? Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, I think I'm cutting out a little
bit.
No
problem, no problem. So the first thing is, yes, absolutely. You want to be setting expectations. You want to make sure those are crystal clear, because that's where most of the conflict can come from. You can have a conversation, but if you're noticing that there may be communication challenges, I recommend writing it down as well. It can feel like overkill, but people take in information in different ways. Some are more verbal, some are more visual. So writing it down gives another way for them to say, oh, okay, I see what you've written. This may or may not sound like what I heard. So clarifying expectations there. And then secondly, in terms of repeat performance issues, that's challenging. And first, the first step of clarifying expectations is really key, but you want to be having conversations. I always say feedback needs to be timely, because you want to say, hey, I've noticed, we had this conversation about what our expectations were, and I noticed this wasn't met. What happened? Why? And then you can use that framework to explain why this is important to you. And then I always have a 3 strikes you're out rule, but the reality is that context is everything. But really, depending on what the topic is, it could not allow maybe that many times. But if they're a learner, it depends what the position is too. Are they an apprentice? Are they somebody who's supposed to be very experienced? Because there is a need for respect, right? We're talking about in that third step, I need or value this thing.
Totally. And I guess it really does depend on the industry and what the standards are regularly, because if you're not in an industry where there is a kind of a standard practice and expectations and guidelines that are laid out beforehand, or a certain company culture, if something is more relaxed where you're working with a different type of person and a more perhaps artistic atmosphere where that's not necessarily part of the company culture as much.
Right.
Is that, I guess that would probably just be something that you would address earlier in the hiring process, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic. I mean, I think I wrote about this in LinkedIn the other day, how human resources, we call them human resources, but humans are the most important part of our company. And so choosing the right team and cultivating that team is so critical to growing business. But so no matter what type of business it is, but I think that clarifying expectations, you're right, from the hiring process, what you were expecting of them when they're in this role, but also then for specific tasks, really, really can be powerful.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thanks for your questions. So as we close this out, I wanted to share with you the keys to strengthening emotional fluency. The first one is to be patient with yourself. It's just, I always use the analogy of learning a language, but it's just like any new skill, it takes practice. So be kind and be patient with yourself. Secondly, do not bypass your emotions. People can read your emotions even if you don't acknowledge them. this is what's powerful. You can be the last person in the room to realize that everyone knows you're frustrated, but you are putting on a brave face, and just explaining you're frustrated can really diffuse a situation. And the sooner you feel that emotion, the sooner you can release it. And if you bypass it, you're just saving that experience for a less ideal time to express it. For instance, if you're feeling frustration at work and you go through the day, and before you come home, you haven't processed that emotion in some way, you may end up expressing that on the person you love the most. So it does take practice to get better at this, and just be kind to yourself and know that you can get support. So if you are looking for more support, I'm happy, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to support you. I'd love to bring more joy and more desire of what you desire into your life. So if you would like a copy of the framework, Simran through Canopy Space will be sharing this recording, but if you'd like a paper copy, you can send an email, and I'm happy, virtual paper copy, a Word document of this, I can share that with you. And also, if you're interested, there's a bonus worksheet which allows you to expand your emotional vocabulary that you can sign up on our email list through our website at larasah.com, and you can get a copy of that. Happy to share that with you, totally free. This, as Simran mentioned, is actually part 1 of 3. So we just dove into 1 of the 5 key areas. But next time we're going to be diving into part 2, which is leading with purpose. And then part 3, premium fuel for a calm mind. So I really want to thank you for being committed to your growth and your interest in enhancing your relationships and your influence. So I'd love to hear from you in the meantime. Let's stay connected. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Lara. And as she mentioned, I have recorded this and it'll be up on our YouTube channel, which is Canopy Events, and our Facebook tomorrow. And we hope to see you here next time. I believe our next talk's on is it the 29th?
I think, is it May 6th? I think that's what we...
Hold on, I can't remember. Oh wait, no, it is, yeah, the 6th. You're right. Ignore what I said. So May 6th is when our next talk with Lara is. If there's any more questions, we've got, a few more minutes left. As we'll call it an evening.
Just raise your hand if you have any questions. And there's ways to reach us afterwards if you'd like to communicate more privately, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, take care and we will see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.